to it. I am not going to read bios except to say I've got Kathleen Kennedy, Executive Director of MIT Horizon. I've got Lucy Melvin from Deloitte. She leads the data and AI practice, and needing no introduction, but I'll give you one anyway. Captain Brian Erickson, former CDAO of the U.S. Coast Guard. So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much. Let's just start with an icebreaker question. Tell us a little bit about yourself, but then also how you got into the issue of AI literacy in the public sector and what makes you passionate about it. And we'll start with you, Kathleen. Let's just go down a row.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. Happy Friday. Thanks for coming out today. Let's see. So I've been at MIT for 2 decades, and there I've worked in emerging technologies and AI. So I've been playing this game for a long time and focusing on sort of the education part of it. I work at the Center for Collective Intelligence and then at MIT's Open Learning. And so what I do is focus on how are we designing and training intelligent organizations. So that's the focus of my work and thinking about that continuum. And we're doing cutting edge things around educating. And then we're really thinking about how organizations need to be transformed, and they feed back and forth. I'll get more into that as we discuss. How I got into this game is actually my partner in crime over there, John Radovan, was at the time he stood up the AI accelerator at MIT. That's something that we did with the Air Force, and it's still continuing. And that's to look at how AI technologies need to be researched and then pushed into the force. He recognized, and I quickly saw too, that we needed to do education on how do we actually educate the workforce. And we sort of saw that at scale. We saw that as an MIT-sized problem. And so we did a 3.5-year research study with the Air Force on how do we do that. And I'll unpack that more, but I want to go ahead and pass it on.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kathleen. So good morning, everyone. Lucy Melvin with Deloitte Consulting. So I am part of our government and public sector consulting business, and I have spent the last 15 years helping government organizations with organizational and workforce transformation and really adopting the future of work. So that's how I came to this, because obviously this is the next wave of disruption that we see across the economy and across government. And what I am really excited about is all the opportunity to help organizations as they're identifying the best ways to apply these technologies, think about then what that means for the organization and for the workforce, and of course also what that means for the HR function that's enabling the talent and the people across the organization. So that's kind of how I came to this and where I focus. All right. Right.
Okay, there we go. For me, Captain Brian Erickson. I'm a active duty captain in the United States Coast Guard. I was the Coast Guard's first chief data and artificial intelligence officer. But before that, I was a career aviator, flew H-65 Dolphin helicopters most of my career, and then C-130s for a tour, and an aeronautical engineer. And so I would say that the majority of my time was in operations, and then the organization, this 234-year-old organization that had never really focused on data and artificial intelligence, recognized, hey, we are behind and we need to get serious about it. So we resourced my position in a team, and started to get after it. And part of our charge really was to look at how are we going to educate the workforce. And that really came down to my exploration of both data and artificial intelligence literacy during that tour. I just recently left that post back in April, and I'm currently serving as the Deputy Director of the Department of Homeland Security Presidential Transition Office. So AI education across the department is increasing, and I'll be able to talk a little bit about that, but that's how I found my way here.
Fantastic. And I think this is all part of a journey. This is AI is not new, but the acceleration and the application of it is really new and continues to grow every day. There's not a news story without it. And to stay on point, this is an ai+careers special event. And I really appreciated how you all touched on the job implication of that. And so I definitely want to circle back to that. I want to also ask, the idea of AI literacy, while so important, seems also a bit amorphous. Can you tell us, and let's go in reverse order, what is AI literacy? And to that job's point, why is it important?
Yeah. So for me, as you know, and I think of my journey as this 3-year opportunity to kind of design how the organization is going to get value from artificial intelligence. And I think about it as like a flywheel. If you can get this flywheel moving in the organization where you have probably a thin slice of experts around artificial intelligence, and then you start to make senior leaders understand the importance and where the value streams are going to come from, and then you get the young workforce excited about it, and the mid-level managers, and you get this flywheel moving, you can really start to make changes in a largely bureaucratic organization, and that's kind of what we were trying to do. I think back, and I'll get to answering the question, is what is AI literacy? But I think back of the days where doctors once did medicine without CT scans or MRIs. And one day, the MRI came along, and those doctors who did medicine without MRIs were irrelevant. Okay, that is an example right there, in my opinion, where we probably called them witch doctors. At that time we started to almost make fun of them. Like, I'm not going to go get. I just tore my ACL. I know there's a damage there. I'm not going to somebody that doesn't have an MRI to use. Okay, that is a partnership with AI. Well, there was a lot of that organization that had to understand how they're going to make that partnership happen. A lot of literacy and understanding of making that happen. I saw the same thing happen within our organization for cybersecurity. Cybersecurity at one time, I don't need to pay attention to it. I don't have an issue with it. But when it started to become a problem, when there started to become value in becoming cybersecurity operators, both offensive and defensive, that's when we really had the flywheel moving. And so if I can get AI literacy from the bottom up and the top down across the organization, we can start to understand what the value is of AI. We can start to understand the risks. We can start to do good things within the organization. So that's how I look at AI literacy.
I think to add to that, and you started to introduce this idea, Brian, but we kind of distinguish between AI literacy and AI fluency, and believe that, there's a continuum there. And what every organization's challenge right now is, how do they build the broad AI literacy, the awareness, the understanding of the fundamentals, and also within the organizational context, the understanding of the vision for how this is going to be applied for the mission. What are the things that need to be in place in terms of the policies and guardrails for use? Because that's actually empowering, right? I see this as a parent. Sometimes it's counterintuitive, but when you have the right rules in place, that's actually empowering, because then you know what you can and you can't do, right? And it's also really important because while there is such a focus on increasing the amount of AI talent and technical talent across government organizations, there has to be broad-based literacy, because the power of AI is that it can change how we're delivering the mission. But you have to have the partnership between everyone in the workforce having some understanding in order to be able to, kind of democratize that innovation, right? That has to be a partnership between the mission and the technologists and understanding what can be done.
I would build on that in that I love both of these ideas that you put on the table. Confidence would be something that I would say is that you want people to have AI confidence. I'm going to start pushing that as a new term, because I think people feel like, I'm not illiterate. That seems like rude. But we want to give people confidence that they can have the conversations and do the exploration that they need to do to, have conversations with vendors in ways that they feel very confident about making decisions, asking questions, and I'll point to John on this one, because we had this great conversation last night. It's having the mental models and then the organizational structure in place to be able to start pushing that into the organization. And I've been working on this for a long time. So at the MIT Center for Collective Intelligence, we've been thinking about that structure and the organizational structures that need to be in place on how do you think about bringing AI into the collective intelligence of the organization, right? And so I think about this as we're building the science around the future of work, because just like Brian said, that the doctors used to be able to do things before we had some of those tools. There's a fundamental science that all doctors have and know, and they're building on that, but there's sort of a fundamental, and we don't really have the fundamentals in place around organizational structures to build them, to bring in these new technologies. And that's what we're actually sort of building, that scaffolding and the science behind it. And I'm working with, a team of people at MIT, the professor who wrote The Future of Work in 2004, well before, this moment, we're really sort of building that. And one of the tools that we're using is something called supermind design. So how do we build these superminds?
I love all of that. And I also love the term confidence, because I think you're right. The framing is, what are we trying to get after and what outcome are we trying to have? And we're trying to operationalize AI for people. And so many conversations are, oh, I didn't realize I could use it in that way. Oh, I didn't realize that was something that could help augment and do my job better or faster. So that's really, really important. I want to pull on some threads here, and I'll start with you, Brian. You mentioned about top down and bottom up. And I think that's really important, because it suggests that different flavors of AI education might be more appropriate for different learners. And so could you talk about how you approach that at the Coast Guard in terms of targeting different types of learners?
Yeah, you bet. And the real experience on how you would educate a workforce is right here. And we did go to MIT for training, as well as the Department of Air Force we partnered with. And so as we were and I think this is kind of tactical, but as we were designing our literacy program, our educational program around data and artificial intelligence, it was obvious that the senior leaders are not going to get the same courses as the young service members. And the Coast Guard's average age, this is a young workforce. It's probably, don't quote me on this, but it's got to be around 23 or 24. It's very, very young, because the majority of our workforce, is junior enlisted personnel. And so what is going to excite them, and what are we going to be able to do there? And then also, we had data and artificial intelligence experts. We looked at those as a category. How are we going to educate them and make them better at their particular role? So we kind of split up the workforce in a couple of sections. The bottom-up stuff was, computer-based or online learning opportunities. When we worked with MIT on the Horizons and the entire workforce. I remember when I left, I think 7,000 people in this 55,000 member organization had signed up for MIT Horizons. Thank you, Kathleen, for that. And that was through DoD. Thanks, DoD, for hooking us up. And that was a lot of our bottom-up work right there. We also had specific courses for data and AI professionals. On the top-down side, DoD came out with some executive education for leaders, and I was pushing all of our flag and SES senior leaders to this so that they could just go and sit with other leaders within Department of Defense, some of which are working directly with artificial intelligence in warfare and other segments of their business, cybersecurity, intelligence community. And we would send them to those courses, and that was kind of like the top down, but also a lot of CDAO time with senior executives to hear what their business problems were, and then it wasn't just about, hey, what value can I bring with use cases or technology, but let's talk a little bit about educating you and your vertical and your workforce. So those were some of the ways that we did it. And we also worked with Deloitte and others on how I could do it better for the organization.
And let's drill down on that a little bit. So, Kathleen, you've worked a lot with the DoD and thinking about, and that's so many different, that's 46 components, 3 million people. Can you talk a little bit about that experience and how you and MIT Horizon have been trying to get after AI literacy and what that entailed?
Sure. So Brian just talked a little bit about where we are now. Let me tell you a little bit about how we got here, and I talked a bit about this at my intro. Back in 2020, the Air Force did a mapping of their workforce and looking at, just like Brian talked about, sort of you had senior leaders, you had people, sort of the large amount of the workforce, and then you have a small group that are people that are actually building AI using data that are highly trained. So sort of three main groups. And then what we did working with the AI Accelerator and the Air Force folks there is think about how do we need to educate them in different ways. And we started experimenting with different modalities, different ways of using sort of synchronous education moments where bringing people together either on a digital platform, in synchronously talking to each other, or in person. We had a number of groups come to MIT to do different programs of varying lengths. And then we had asynchronous things, right, that you do on your own time. And it was something that you would do that was over a course of time, or a resource that you could just access, like when you needed it on demand. And so we systematically researched all of those different components, because that's what we do. We sort of try to build the science behind how do you make decisions, how do you build programs like this. And so we published 9 papers, we did several cohorts that went through, and what we found was that, especially with this type of workforce that's getting deployed, redeployed, lots of different things happened over that time, that they needed on-demand, asynchronous things that they were able to access with some synchronous moments where they would come together to collaborate with peers and learn from peers. And that was sort of it seems sort of obvious, but we actually did the research to figure that out.
It's actually not. And I think a lot of people who are trying to design programs need to appreciate what works and what doesn't.
Yeah. And so I'd say that a model that in parallel we'd been building was something called ACE. And that is looking at continuous education that is done in a way that is really important for the workforce. And so it was really interesting because we were working with the Air Force and they were like, we have our own ACE. And I was like, no, completely different ACE. It's like, I think we learned in government, there's lots of acronyms. In academia, there's lots of acronyms. So, it's the idea that you need to be agile in the way that you're doing education. Education is not what it used to be, where there was a finish line. You got a diploma and then you were sort of done. Sometimes you would do training in different things, but now the idea of agile continuous education, that you need to be continually educating and upskilling, and everyone's different. And everyone needs to do that. So that's our next frontier, I would say, Diana, and I'd love to actually talk with the group about that, is the promise of individualized learning. The idea around an assessment of what do you need, where are you going in your career. That's the promise of bringing AI, not only educating about AI, but bringing AI into the process on how that can help us to do this.
100%. AI education and AI as an educational tool, two very distinct but complementary ideas. And Lucy, I'd like to actually get your broader perspective, you had mentioned about the importance of having an AI-ready federal workforce, a data and AI-ready federal workforce. And DoD is one community. There are many communities and many agencies and departments, each with different levels of maturity in these technologies. I'm curious from your vantage point, what you think is the best approach of scaling some of the educational opportunities that are already out there, and advice that you might give to departments who are just getting started.
Well, I think so there is a lot to be done, a lot of opportunity and a lot of activity right now. I think one of the things that we have seen across the federal government is obviously the executive order has really accelerated attention on this, right? In terms of how to approach this and sort of most effectively address AI literacy in education, I think what I see is, first of all, it's important that you actually start with the strategy. So you have to, you have to look at what is the organization's AI strategy, the why, like what are we doing? And that has to drive what your AI workforce strategy is. And, we're talking very specifically about the kind of training and literacy and fluency elements of this. But something that we also see is really critical is having that broader lens of the AI workforce strategy. And so it's understanding how is this changing how work is being done? And specifically in the context of every organization, what is your strategy for applied AI? How is that going to impact the mission? And then what do you need to do to align the workforce to that? And this is something where we've designed an AI workforce impacts lab that we've used with clients to help foster those conversations to start to understand and accelerate that process, and to inform the approach to what is the broader kind of literacy and fluency training strategy going to be, and then to also start to anticipate what are those impacts to who needs to be brought into the workforce, like what are the skill gaps that exist today, and then how can organizations start to plan ahead and think about where they need to go. And, ultimately what this should drive at is a strategy that also informs your approach to that continuous education and learning. Because these, the other thing that's very interesting is there's so much energy right now on this topic. And there is a risk that we see it as there's a finish line. Okay, we've done this. We've rolled out this. Well, that's a starting point. It's building a foundation. And this is something we've seen also internally in our own organization. Like you lay that foundation, but you have to continue to build and evolve based on the profiles of the different job functions and roles in the organization and what you need to build for the long term.
And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well, Brian, in terms of really concretizing this idea of AI education into strategic planning. And that actually gets into my next question about competing priorities. There are so many competing priorities on our workforce's time and attention. Many different things that people need to do in a given day. Why should this be a priority? I'm curious from your perspective how you were able to get this out front and make it a priority strategically.
Yeah, and I was listening to Lucy. I cannot agree more. And why is this important to your organization? Let me just tell a quick story. I was a commanding officer of Coast Guard Air Station Savannah, Georgia. So any search and rescue that needed a helicopter from North Carolina, South Carolina border all the way down to the middle of Florida, we would provide. And one day, there was a surfer that had gone missing out at Tybee Island. And Tybee Island has some hardcore rip currents, undertows, but in my 30 years of doing this, rarely does a surfer go missing. They're just so skilled in the water, they find their ways out. But a surfer's missing. It's 5 o'clock at night. We don't have a lot of time until dark. They're wearing a wetsuit. It was in the winter. It was wind and waves out there. So we were out searching with 2 helicopters. We could not find this guy, and we were worried because he should be floating, should be out there, should be still swimming. He should be warm enough. And it got into the night, and we kept on searching and searching, and we were really, really worried. We build probability detection curves and where we would search in the most probable location based on wind and current. And at the edge of one of those turns at night, the clouds had kind of cleared and the moon was out. And on night vision goggles, one of my pilots saw a reflection of the moon off of his watch. And this is, so he's outside of kind of the search area, right on the edge of it. And we found him. We did an uneventful hoist, picked him up. He said we flew over him 25 times. Now, if we had an artificial intelligence computer vision model that would detect anomalies in the water, put a little box around, things, my sense is that we would not have flown over him, 25 times. Now, an organization that has got there where it is a AI accepting culture, and you don't just start there from nothing. You have to become literate and competent and proficient and interested, and the flywheel has to be spinning. An organization isn't going to let that happen for long, and that's why in my mind, and I can give, child sex trafficking, fentanyl, counter narcotics targeting, dark targets. There's so much opportunity for the use of artificial intelligence in the operational environment for which I work, and DoD and the warfighter. But we've got to kind of get over the barrier that might prevent us, and not just technological, but also funding and culture. And I think that this is why this is so important to instill this within our organization.
And I want to invite you, Lucy and Kathleen, to comment in on that. How do we start to change hearts and minds? This is a conversation about change management as much as anything else. How do we start to make using data and AI tools the norm across many, many different cultures that comprise the federal government? Kathleen, if you have any thoughts on that.
Lucy? I was going to say, and because I think this is a great illustration of it, what is really important is for leaders to set the vision. And part of that is storytelling, which we just heard a great example of a really compelling story that can help you see the potential for the application of the technology and how it can accelerate the work that's being done. How you can imagine, as you're talking about that, how that changes the work that a search and rescue crew would be doing.
Yeah, take the search out of search and rescue and just go straight to rescue. And AI can help.
Yeah, we can accelerate that. And that makes it real. And I think in many organizations right now, that's where there's a real need for leaders to be able to articulate that and to share that vision for why is this important for us. I was actually talking with a colleague about this discussion, and they're like, oh, well, what's interesting is you're starting with the assumption that it's important to everyone. I'm like, right. Well, because part of that is you actually do have to do the change management of communicating the vision of why this is important in the organization, why workers and employees need to have this knowledge and understanding, and how it can help them and how it can help really the mission that they care about. Because that's something that is consistent across the organizations we work in, is there's a passion for the mission. And if we can connect that and show, like, this isn't about just the next disruption of technology. This is about delivering the mission of government differently and empowering humans to focus their time and energy on the inherently human aspects of that work so that they can deliver that more effectively.
So I love this. I love the story. I want to actually have a writer talk to you about that and write that story. And so we run a learning platform called MIT Horizon that is as Diana said, now deployed to across the entire DoD. So that is an asynchronous, on-demand program with, we're continually building learning tools for people to basically upskill around AI and other emerging technologies. That's the other thing, that it's not just sort of AI in this, silo itself, that you have to understand data. You need to understand the Internet of Things. You need to understand the cloud. You need to understand edge computing. You need to understand all of these other technologies too, and cyber, right? They're all interconnected. This is sort of a bigger thing. We're never going to be done, right? The stories is really key. That's one thing that we found, that every individual has a different mission. And we care about different things. We have different goals, but we are inspired by the stories, and then we learn from them. At MIT, we call that analogies. We use analogies on how do you train people and teach people. So we're inspired by that story that you just told, and then you think. So we have something called impact spotlights on our platform that are, like hundreds of stories about how this technology was used to solve this problem. But you strip away that, and you can think about, again, this is where I was saying the science, like, how do you think about this goal? This tool can be used to achieve that goal. This technology can do that. And then that it can inspire anyone to think, oh, I could do that. And what we want to do is give people the confidence to think creatively about how these technologies can be harnessed to solve their goals.
That's fantastic. No, I think contextualization is so important, and that actually gets perfectly into the next topic I want to bring back from the beginning and ask all of you about, thinking about the job implications, right? Because this is also about AI awareness, to what end, to how you can leverage it in your job for your mission, right? In your organization. So there's the one thread about making sure that you're empowered and equipped to be able to do that. There's another thread about what this means from a jobs standpoint, right? So thinking about AI plus careers, thinking about what the future nature of work might be for people. What do you have insights as to how people who are nervous or uncertain about what these technologies could mean, how people in the public, you gave a great story about a really fantastic application, potential application of AI in the public sector. What might you say to people who are unsure of what this means for their job or their mission set, and how their jobs might change?
I mean, I got one comment on that. I think that there was, I saw this interview of Steve Jobs back in, I think it was like 1995, when he was releasing like the iPhone 3, and someone was like, do you really think it's going to compete with my BlackBerry? And Steve Jobs is like, I just think that we need to let the consumer decide. Well, all I'm going to do is try to build the best iPhone possible, and that's what I'm going to do. I think we probably all have them in our pocket now. And so, but there was a resistance to that. And what I think, kind of like the MRI and the CT scan example, is that these doctors, they chose to partner with AI. I mean, the AI builds those images a human could never build. And it's readable then by a professional. The phone, the mobile device, gave us and unlocked parts of our life that some of us can't live without now. AI, in a broader sense, is going to do that. I think I would suggest, to my grandparents or my mom and dad, you're going to have to push past and embrace it, because if you don't, you're going to be the irrelevant doctor who doesn't use MRIs.
And it's faster. I think that's one of the things that we're seeing that you had. So think back, you all look very young. So I remember in 1999 when, the .com sort of changed everything. And I remember in 1990, I worked in media then. And in 1995, all these, newspapers and magazines were just putting all of their content online, because that's a great marketing channel. Isn't that going to be great? it destroyed their entire business model because they, then everything was out there for free and the consumer saw that as free. So that was a mistake in a way in thinking about they didn't understand how that technology was going to transform everything. So that's just one example. And then, there was sort of, I always think about this as there's really fast things and then there's the long game, because that sort of happened in that moment, happened really fast. And then there was sort of this crash correction, because right now we're burning really hot, I think, with AI. And I keep wondering, I'm not saying that it's going to happen, but I feel like there's probably some kind of like correction normalization that's going to happen. And then it's the long work that needs to be done. It's probably going to be faster. But can you imagine right now a business that does not have a website? Right? Like, and at the time, everyone was trying to figure out how to do it. And now, build on that.
Yeah. Well, and I think when we think about these disruptions in the past, there was change resistance. One thing that we haven't really talked about, but I think is an important aspect of both literacy and just the moment that we're in right now, is that some of the change resistance now is about trusting this technology. And it's a question that's being asked by workers across government for the right reasons, because the mission that we're delivering in government organizations is critical and has to serve all citizens. And so there are questions about making sure that the right guardrails and policies are in place so that there's trustworthy application of AI. And I think that's one of the things that we haven't talked about yet, but that is a really critical part of the message for leaders to share with their organizations, because some of the questioning is natural. I mean, I hear from clients like, I know I have workforce members who they have no problem using ChatGPT to plan their next vacation, but they're asking really real questions about making sure that it's appropriate, how we're applying it in the work that we do. And I think that's something that, it is part of the conversation right now that's really important. And so it's also communicating. And again, a lot of this comes back to, what is the strategy? How are you approaching this? But, in order to create that momentum and engage workers and help them to embrace this, I think it's also about, communicating the intentional application and the work that's happening to make sure that this is applied AI for good. That's something that we focus on a lot with our clients. And I think there are many frameworks that are being put in place to do that. And that has to be communicated.
I mean, I wonder, when the calculator was introduced and the teachers were picketing, I think that was like 84. I wonder if there was this fear back then, like we are going to be all stupid. America is going to be so dumb. Do not allow calculators in schools. This is horrible. And I wonder if there was a uncomfortable, I don't trust this. Like, this is a bad decision. Whoever are the people who are making the decision to put these calculators in these schools, I don't trust them. This is a bad idea, and so I agree. We have not had something that can happen so fast and has a terrifying story of the robots that can overpower us and outsmart us, and so that is a far edge concern. But in the middle is like, what about my private information? Like, how that's actually important to me. I don't want that available out there, and I don't want it to be used against me and harmful. And so it's bigger than the calculator, but I just wonder if that same kind of fear is there.
I think let's think about the calculator is a good analogy. The internet is another one, in thinking about how we now with, the iPhone, thinking about like, oh yeah, I'm just going to pick up an airline ticket. I could sit here and do that in like 2 seconds because I can do it with one finger right now. And you never before, you had to like call someone to do that, or actually go to the airport and do that. Like but that took a long time. It's the long, hard work that needs to be done to change and transform the organizational structures and the way that we operate. And that's why I'm saying, like, that's the work that needs to be done to think about the organizational structures and the transformation, and then the norms and laws that need to be put in place to do that.
And to Lucy's point, like, it's going to take some time. Like
Yes,
the calculator took a little bit of time. The internet took some time for people to come comfortable. AI is going to take time. I just think that, literacy education programs are wrapped around artificial intelligence will reduce that time period,
Yes, exactly.
and make the comfort of the masses occur quicker.
So there's comfort and confidence. Yeah.
I say it actually circles right back to the confidence point that you were making, and also back to the first question of what is AI literacy. This all has to be a part of that. What AI is, it is not killer robots. And so what are these tools, and how can we use them effectively for public good?
Well, and I think part of that is also communicating how this is already being used. I mean, one of the things that's interesting is I think we're in a moment where the amount of attention has increased, just given some of the disruptions with generative AI. But there's also an important education and literacy point here about, there have been many applications of AI, and this is an evolution of that at this point in time.
Yeah. One thing I like to say is just I remind around, what is intelligence? Like, what are we actually talking about? We say AI. What does that even mean? And so, it's like, okay, let's take a beat. Let's say, okay, intelligence, when we're working at MIT, one of the definition that we use is intelligence is the ability to achieve goals. And then artificial intelligence is basically a, technology harnessing data to achieve goals. And then I think about collective intelligence is the ability of a group to achieve a goal. And that is often a human with an AI, or right now, AI can achieve goals itself. And so that's an important change. But I think just sort of grounding in that, what are we talking about, sort of at the root level, is important to slow down and think about those things.
Absolutely. I have more questions, but I know we're running low on time. So I want to see if anybody in the audience has a question they'd like to ask. And can you please introduce yourself? We'll go, right, you and then.
Hi, I'm Jeffrey Frank. I'm an attorney at DOT and an evening MBA student at Georgetown. Recently, I saw an interesting piece. Jennifer Palka had a nice term for it, the cascade of rigidity, which the idea being, you get a rule at the top, and they give some flexibility, and then you lose a little at the next level, and you lose a little at the next level. By the time you get to the ranking file, you can't do it at all. And I'm sure, generative AI is a great example of that. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about, as a change agent, about where kind of in that stack you kind of go and maybe when to kind of loosen that up or give an appropriate level of flexibility without making it too flexible on any side. Is it just a bottom-up, top-down thing, or are there other ways of thinking about it?
A couple comments on that. It sounds to me like it's thinking about, like, how do you do prompting effectively to harness these new tools? And, some people are going to figure it out themselves and really sort of, asynchronously invest the time in their personal time to really just figure it out. That I was talking about, sort of like the fast and the slow. That's what we're talking about. Literacy is actually, prompt engineering is a skill that we need to basically introduce to everyone to understand that there's a knowledge and there's a skill, maybe breaking something down like that really understanding, like, what does it even mean? And sort of the knowledge that you need to have foundationally to understand that, to start to reason, to do it And then you need to have skills to understand the difference between the different platforms, right? And how do you use Google Notebook versus how do you use ChatGPT versus how do you use Microsoft Copilot? And I think that each one of them is actually a little bit different. So we need to do it's education at multiple levels, and that takes a long time, and that would take a long time to do anything for that. So that's just a quick on the education note comment.
So I think that something that is important from both an education and also a change management perspective is giving hands-on experience. And so I was thinking about your idea of the cascade of rigidity, if I'm understanding, if you plan intentionally around how you can have a strategy of building literacy and fluency in the organization across the workforce, and also recognize, and this is, application of kind of adult learning theory and how we all engage best, like find ways to build hands-on opportunities and safe spaces to experiment and test. I think that's a critical part of building literacy and also allowing space to develop skills and doing so in a way that it provides some flexibility and some room for innovation and some room for mistakes.
And are you the cascade of rigidity? If you apply a rule at the top, then it kind of gets less and less rigid as it goes down. Is that you're kind of
more?
It gets more rigid. Gotcha. So as a long-term military person, I would say that it varies. It varies depending upon how the rule might have been delivered. I'll give you one example. Before 2021, there just wasn't a lot of talk in Department of Defense about artificial intelligence, and started to kind of heat up, from then until now. And I remember early on, Deputy Secretary Hicks kind of came out and made a statement that we will have a person in the loop on every decision, and AI is not going to make a life or death, targeting decision, et cetera. Let's just be very, very clear about that. I think that when that rolls down in my world, it stays pretty solid. It doesn't change. But other communication of other types of boundary conditions or rule sets do tend to make change. I think that it's very, very important on how you communicate those.
Thank you, everybody. The presentation was very interesting. My name is Alex Aparicio. I'm a student at Johns Hopkins. My question, working with companies specifically on AI literacy, is I think the easiest thing to focus on is prompt engineering. And in looking at this, I always think like, this is the way we interact with these systems now. As they evolve, obviously this is going to change. What would you say are the key skills when you talk about competence or literacy, and how do you make sure that the trainings give people the tools to be able to evolve their toolkit as the technology does? Thank you.
I was just for new and mid-career professionals.
I think it actually, new professionals almost have an advantage because they are, they don't have the same expectation on them as someone who's in a serious leadership position. But in fact, they haven't been trained on all of these new things. And so someone who's coming into the workforce now, who's actually been in more of that education safe space and utilizing these tools on the front line, that's an interesting advantage that they have now. I think that it goes back to sort of Brian's answer on the last point of it's about utilizing things and being able to operate with them. And it goes back to my point about it's sort of, it seems really fast right now, but there's the long aspect of this that we're just going to normalize it within the system.
Yeah. I think the other thing that your question raises in my mind that we haven't really talked about as much, we're very focused on kind of AI literacy and workforce training. But the other thing that's really critical when you think about the broader workforce strategy, and I think for any individual when they think about their own career development, is also to keep in mind what we call enduring human skills. So if you think about the potential of these technologies and actually all the disruptions that we've talked about, what they have done is augmented the way that humans do work, or they've automated elements of work, or they've introduced new job functions, right? Jobs that didn't exist before because there are new needs based on the technology that's been introduced. But there are core things that are part of how humans interact and how we do work, and that intelligence that you spoke to, Kathleen, that are not going away, and that actually, in many cases, when I talk to clients, like, this is something that's keeping them up at night. How do we build the leadership skills in our workforce? How do we both focus on this need for technology literacy and fluency and evolving, but not lose the importance of developing our workforce for the future, which actually a lot of that is around these enduring human capabilities.
And I would say that to the leadership point, because that's exactly what I was thinking. I was almost kind of thinking a little bit more towards the culture point, but you're going to be the leader of a division or a business unit or the CEO of a company. How are you going to allow your employees to take appropriate risk and have a culture of experimentation? Because if they don't, they're not going to get anywhere with AI. If they're concerned and it's all on them and there's nobody backing them up above them, they're not willing to take any risks. They'll punch the clock and they'll leave. And that's not what you want for innovation in government, in industry, anywhere. And so I would say, what skills do you need? You need leadership skills. How do you be a leader to allow your organization employees to understand they can take some risks, they can fail, you're going to back them up, and everyone's going to learn from that. And so I think that just one quick example, our new commandant, Linda Fagan, the first female to be a service chief of in the armed forces in the history of America. She came out with a slogan, "Tomorrow looks different, and so will we." And as the chief data and artificial intelligence officer, I felt like that was a license for me to operate. We need to look different. We got to figure out different ways of doing business. I'm in charge of artificial intelligence. Let's go. Let's make some mistakes. Let's roll up our sleeves and figure this out.
Thank you so much. And just one very quick lightning round to put a pin on some of these things. If you were king or queen for a day, what is one change you would make, or one policy you would institute to address some of these longstanding challenges? And we'll start with you.
If I was queen for a day, that's right. Future looks different. No, I think that I think I would just add to that point is that I would push hard to have a culture of experimentation. If you can get the culture itself, I think that everything can follow, and that's not easy to do. That is not easy to do.
If I were queen for a day, I think leaders across the organizations that I work with would be communicating the vision and building that culture and empowering the workforce and providing the tools that they need.
Let's see. I'll be queen for the day. It is my birthday, so exactly.
Yeah.
Say happy birthday.
I would say that I think that agile continuous education would be adopted in the norm, and that very much building on the two things, because ultimately what we're talking about is the change in incentive structure in organizations to be fearless, to work together to win, and that we would be agile, we would be continuously learning, and we would become super intelligent organizations.
Thank you so much. And I forgot to say at the top, I'm Diana Gelhaus, Director for Economy at the Special Competitive Studies Project. And I just want to thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you to these incredible panelists for sharing their perspectives and insights with us. happy birthday, Kathleen. If you could all please join me in a round of applause for our speakers, and we'll be sure to continue this conversation. This is an evergreen topic that will continue to have legs and will continue to need to be elevated through these types of discussions. Please also mark your calendars for future AI Plus Careers events at SCSP. We're going to be on location October 23rd at the Waldorf Astoria. We have an AI Plus Robotics Summit. It's going to be incredible, and we'll be doing a special on-site AI Plus Careers at that event. And then on November 12th, we have Justin Reynolds from the State Department coming to talk about tech diplomacy. So please do mark your calendars, follow us on LinkedIn, and we look forward to seeing you at future events. So thank you. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you, Dana.